is WoW actually made for? Elitists versus casuals. Now, not everyone can be as elite as me. Not everyone can, work and play this game at the highest caliber with the highest level of skill possible, right? Some of us are skill challenged. Some of us are just casual. Some of us don't have the time to invest in this game that we did back when we started playing this game. I was 14, now I'm 34. Things have certainly changed, right? But you know what hasn't changed? WoW elite groups, right? The elitists in WoW are jerks. They're assholes. They are what they are. Is the game catering to them, though? We saw recently the Mythic Plus changes where a plus 12 key can't deplete once you get to a certain level. That's an elite thing. Most people aren't pushing past plus 12s. The other thing is raiding, right? We got the Race to World First, which very much caters to the elite. And then the nerfing of raids afterwards to try to get casuals to be able to do this shit. So who is WoW really made for? Let's see what Marsalian has to say.
Hello there. So, what kind of a player are you? Are you a casual player? Someone that is satisfied with checking out the story, grabbing a mount, and maybe seeing the raid? Someone that wants a chill escape from daily life? Or are you an elitist?
Jesus Christ. Fucking left the blurps on. Who the fuck, man? Shit. Who the fuck was that? Cadence, damn it.
A gamer that always looks for a challenge to push themselves past their limit and constantly aim higher. Someone that likes obstacles and figuring out the puzzles laid out by the encounter. Who is this game made for? Or rather, a better question is, who should this game be made for? And is it wrong to be the other kind of player?
Well, let's be honest. The elites of WoW are really, I mean, you could think of yourself as an elite, but truly the elites are the top 1%. They're the guys who are pushing, high-end mythic content. I'm not talking about killing mythic bosses at the end of the season. I'm talking about the first, top 100 guilds and all that stuff, and killing bosses early, pushing keys into the 20s. Those are the elitists. Now, should the game be catering to the top 1%? Fuck no. That's a dumb way to make a game. And I've said it many times before. The 99% are the people that Blizzard should worry about, not the top 1% that are breaking some kind of weird meta thing or doing some kind of weird shit where they feel like they got to adjust the classes across the board for everybody. No. So the 99%, that's the answer to this question.
Start with talking about the elitist side of the game and what we like to call the 1% game design. The 1% essentially refers to the game being designed with the best 1% of players in mind. Saying this might not be true really, but it sure feels like that when the tuning of encounters, be it raids or Mythic Plus, seems to be created from a top-down fashion. I'll talk about it right now. Top-down essentially refers to the fact that the hardest difficulty is created first and then it's scaled down for the rest of the players. From past interviews, it's clear it's not 100% top-down since the devs have essentially admitted as such, but it is created with a heavy emphasis on difficult and challenging encounters that require heavy use of weak auras and external sources of information.
Right. The problem with for the devs, and I do empathize with them on this, is that the elitists are most likely the people who play this game a lot. And the people who play this game a lot, and I mean by a lot, I mean like they play it as their fucking job, they're probably going to be the loudest when it comes to feedback. So a lot of times what may just be 1% of the player base may be 50% of the feedback that the devs are seeing. So that's the problem they run into, is they're getting a ton of feedback from people who play the game in a way that the majority of people don't play the game. So sometimes when they listen to that feedback, they are in fact catering to the top 1% and they might not even realize it.
For the player in question to be able to complete the fight. Side note, I have never raided a boss in the past for expansions where our whole raid night was wasted twice because our weak auras wouldn't work and people were being disconnected since they had massive FPS drops from all of the mechanics that are happening at once.
The frame rates issue was an issue early in this raid for sure. I kept saying it. My frames were going nuts. They were dry. It was like a PowerPoint presentation, especially in this egg fight. So, but I noticed it's gotten much better actually. And I play with the minimum amount of add-ons possible. So I don't play with a lot of add-ons. People who were experiencing even worse frame rate drops.
I am talking about Ovinax, of course. In terms of raids in general, I believe Max from Liquid mentioned this, so I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but apparently the heroic version of the raid seems to be the default version from the design perspective, where Mythic is just adding extra mechanics on top of it. This might have been said in a dev interview.
And you know what? This makes sense, and I've actually said it a lot before. Whenever we're doing heroic raiding, I've always said heroic raid is the true end game of WoW. That's what it feels like, because heroic raid really is something that if you just, try, if you just try in the game, you try in the raiding scene a little bit, you will get it done eventually. You will get heroic raid cleared within the season, and that's truly where it feels like that's the real end game of WoW. Anything beyond that is you don't just try. You got to put in a legitimate amount of time to be able to clear a raid on Mythic. So that makes sense, that they basically build it from heroic raid and then go up and down from there in terms of difficulty.
Sometime in the last few months. Certain mechanics like the orbs on Silken Cord that just seem out of place, like they just make no sense for the encounter, is an example of this. Or Kaivisa, where it's just a roided up version of the heroic one. Nothing mythic level, just more balls, more lines,
everything
and more
hits harder.
portals.
Yeah.
At the same time, going down to normal and LFR, mechanics are just shaved off of what you have on heroic and what kind of seems normal. And you can essentially make this argument for any difficulty, so it's hard to explain unless you actually run the raid through its heroic difficulty. Not to mention that Ansurek is a very difficult fight straight up. It's a fun fight, but man, it's also brutal. From the Mythic Plus side of things, I think we and pretty much all other content creators have mentioned this in one way or another. The season is just way too difficult. The affixes that we received this season concerning the Kiss Curse effects seem to do—
Wow, look, somebody else says it and they're not getting bitched out for being a noob by their chat. Wow, that's crazy. It's like he doesn't have a giant, hateful, spiteful, degenerate chat like I do. Yeah, it's too difficult. Everyone gonna tell me get good. No, it's just too difficult. This season is way too hard. If I don't mind a season having difficulty at a plus 23 level key, but when a season is so difficult that doing a plus 6 or a plus 8 is you know, it's almost impossible to just pug or get into because your IO is low and you got to build up from there. And by the way, even the low end keys are difficult for some people. It's just not, it's not good. The way Dragonflight Season 3 is truly the way the difficulty level should be scaled. I liked it. It's hard to do it in 8. Yes, it is. But everybody wants to do an 8 because that's going to give you your mid-track gear. So, and that's also going to give you Keystone Master. So, at the end of the day, that's the key that's always going to matter to people. And in Dragonflight Season 3, it was much easier to do than it is now. That's all I'm saying.
Almost the opposite of what their initial intention was, where now we have extra nameplates we have to interact with during the Orbs week. We have a Dispel affix that forces particular healers to be played or classes to be brought and dispel, or the healers essentially put on a tight clock to overheal every dot they can faster than normal so that they can prevent—
8 is not myth track gear. What is 8 giving you? Top end heroic gear? Yeah. It's what is it giving you? There's a reason why everyone wants to do 8. I think mainly it's probably KSM. It's going to give you KSM if you clear 8s across the board. Yeah, don't tell him. Yeah, okay.
And the enemies from getting buffed. Tanks getting bitch slapped if they blink twice in a row, and DPS players wasting an interrupt because someone used the stun, making the mob cast again, with the party now at least one interrupt short. I have never seen the community uniting in unison since beta, saying basically the same thing. This season of Mythic Plus is just way too hard. When even the elite players are saying this, it's hard to imagine the game was made for them, but here we are, and where we are has been a road way longer than you might know. I remember a time back in the olden days of Wrath and a few expansions since, where players were complaining about LFR and the game being made too easy for a bunch of expansions in a row. Now, I'm not sure if that sentiment was what eventually fueled the game to start having bosses like Kill Jaden.
By the way, Blizzard's not trying to be assholes. There is a reason why they try to make Mythic Plus or maybe raid content more difficult. It's because they don't want people, you know, maybe the elitists only have this problem, but they don't want people gearing out to the max super early in the season and then having nothing really to achieve beyond that. Because at the end of the day, the main progression of this game and any MMO is gearing out, right? It's pushing your item level up, it's pushing your gear to the max, it's getting all best in slot, stuff like that. So when they feel like it's too easy, they feel like people gear out very quickly and then maybe they unsub for the last 2 months of the season or something. Whereas if they feel like they make it very difficult, then they feel like, oh, there's something to strive for, and they're going to stay subbed, and they're going to continue to play. In actuality, I think the frustration of too much difficulty can also cause people to unsub. So there's a balance you got to strike. You can't make it too easy, but you can't make it too hard. It's got to be, semi-hard. We've all experienced that if you're a male, of course.
Razageth and now Ansrek that are historically too difficult to beat for your average ahead of the Curve Raider, or power systems like Azurite, Conduits, and expansive talents that require simulations upon simulations and number crunchings from the biggest WoW brains out there to figure out what is actually doing damage, let alone be optimal. Yet, here we are. I am an elitist, just by association. I'm a Mythic creator that's 6 out of 8 and someone who does plus 11s and 12s and aims to do higher. This is not the highest level of content available, but it is far above what other people are doing, and I'm only telling you this so you know where my talking points are coming from. But that's not important now. What is important is the casual player and what he or she is doing right now. Likely that person isn't playing WoW at the moment, at least from an average numbers point of view, and that's because the game isn't casual. But what is casual?
Casuals probably are taking a break right now. These casual Andes out there, maybe they'll come back for Plunderstorm. There are all these catch-up mechanics, like, what's it called right now? The time-walking stuff that's going on. Basically, that's all catch-up mechanic stuff for the casuals, because the casuals usually will take a break mid-season to mid-late season, and then they'll come back just before the big patch, like 11.1, and try to gear out really quick and catch up. That's why that stuff exists. Casual Andes can beat Ansarek. They could right now. On normal? Hell yeah. They could. On heroic, they're going to need to be carried a little bit.
Casual game content would be the leveling experience you take, while also engaging in the story campaign. A casual gamer will likely do follower dungeons and maybe queue up for some heroics with a slight toe dipped into Mythic Plus.
You probably
know
delves.
this based on the numbers available. Not even half the players in the game are setting foot in a +2 key, let alone actually pushing high-level Mythic Plus.
Really? Not even half the player base does a +2 key? That's actually shocking to me. I don't know why. I would expect actually close to 100% of players to at least do a +2 key. Carry me. Yeah, I'm shocked. Now, in terms of raiding, I would understand. There's a lot of people who just don't have the time to raid. It's a very time-consuming thing to do. And delves are probably something that a casual player really enjoys at this point, because it does help them gear out. Yeah, delves are the casual player's best friend now. So, but I'm shocked at that +2 stat. Wow.
This was a statistic from around 2 months ago when the player base was peaking. Now the cutoffs are seeing over 55% of the player base doing keys. This doesn't mean that suddenly more people are doing dungeons, but it does mean that the player base has bleeded so hard that the number of dungeons far outweighed the casual player base that normally wouldn't even step foot in.
So there you go. I mean, there's your answer. We were talking about how Blizzard now is creating a +12 basically floor, where if you get your key to a +12 or higher, and I think you have to have a 2880 rating, your key will no longer deplete below a 12. But look who that's created for. The top 1.6%. I mean, what the fuck? Why even make a change for that small amount of people? But there it is. And when I first read that change, I was like, oh, great, keys are not going to deplete anymore. That's an amazing thing. Now it turns out it doesn't apply to me. It only applies to the top 1.6%.
Mythic Plus key.
I don't think keys should deplete.
Would imply that the bleeds are basically casual players stopping playing the game.
Okay.
So what other content does a casual player have access to? Raid is still available, and although LFR might be considered the most accessible, which it is the second least popular version after Mythic. More people do the raid on Heroic and Normal than on LFR, and if we will assume that the monthly nerfs of Nerubar are of any indication, the Heroic and Normal versions are likely not on the table for a casual player.
Yeah, the LFR to me is not a true raiding experience. It's not. It's, I mean, half the raid. Usually you go in there. This is my experience as a tank. You go into LFR, you end up fighting the boss. Maybe you started with a 30-man raid. You end up fighting the boss for the majority of the fight with like only 5 people alive. And the boss, you just tank and spank it, and it takes like freaking 20 minutes to kill the boss. That's like the shit that I've experienced in LFR. It's not a true raiding experience. The real raid is heroic. That's the purest form, probably the most intentionally designed form of the raid is heroic raid. Normal is a bit of a training wheels version of it, and then LFR is just a tank and spank. There's no mechanics whatsoever.
meaning even fewer people actually get to raid at all.
Sounds like
Thankfully,
a
story
Sampug.
mode gives people a nice closure to the story of the War Within Season 1. And lastly, delves. This is the content made for and with the casual player in mind. Someone who isn't necessarily worse at the game than their counterparts, but maybe has less time to play due to IRL responsibilities or just maybe game preferences. Since we don't know the exact numbers on delves, it's hard to say if they have been a success with the WoW player, but from all of
I think delves have certainly been a success. I actually enjoy delves. I think they were a great addition to the game. I think they filled a time slot of 10 to 15 minute progression content that never existed in WoW. That's what it's perfect for. And someone like me, you know, married with kids and everything going on in my life, sometimes I crave WoW. I crave it. And that craving could not be satiated for 10 to 15 minutes before. What were you going to do in the game before delves if you only had that amount of time? Now, you get in and do a delve and you're like, hey, I feel like I did something today. I feel like I progressed a little bit. Feel like I made some what's it called? I used my time wisely. So I think delves were a great addition to the game, and I'm glad they're gonna. It's an evergreen thing that's gonna be carried forward.
our discussions
ERP
with
and
people
Goldshire,
that
yeah, you could do that for
regularly
15
raids
minutes.
or push keys, the delves have been something really appreciated, and it's likely a system that will continuously be developed in the future patches, maybe even expansions to come. But that is
Leto, that's not true. I've done freaking tons of delves. I've done more delves than I've done Mythic Plus this season. Okay, I've done a lot of delves.
the current casual content of the game, which is maybe a reach to say that has received less attention than the rest of the endgame content. I love delves, but they get way more repetitive than raids and dungeons.
They do.
They might have more replayability than world quests and world events in general, but if this was to address the casual player that cannot engage in the rest of the game, I feel they drew the short end of the stick once again. Is this important though? Should we care about the casual player? I mentioned earlier that myself and Marcellian as well fit into the more hardcore / elitist category, more so because of the process of elimination. We are definitely not casual players, but we also don't play 6 to 8 hours per day, every day, and we strongly believe the game being made for the high-end players is not okay, and have
Right.
said as much for the past 2 years at almost. And when you decide a raid with a difficult heroic version and scale it down from there, it doesn't translate into easy fights for the casual players. Likewise, when you design Mythic Plus to require precise coordination to complete, let alone smash, while overloading healers and tanks to the point of them quitting the game,
Yeah.
and making a whole
Yeah, I don't. You know, I've thought about it a lot. I don't know if this Mythic Plus season is way more difficult because the affixes and the dungeon pool and everything are more difficult, or if it's really goes back to the tanking and healing changes. The tanking and healing changes changed the game in a big way. It was a huge thing. Tanks used to really be self-sufficient for the most part. You needed people around to help you kill things, but in terms of survivability, tanks could really survive pretty well on their own. And that made Mythic Plus much more easy. Now the fact that they can't, they're very squishy. You're stressing the healer out even more to keep the tank alive, plus keep the DPS alive who are just parsing by standing in the fire. It's created a much more difficult environment for Mythic Plus overall. So it's probably both. Yeah, you're probably right, Konisi. It's probably more difficult, and the tanking changes made it even worse.
system from plus 12 and up for less than 1% of the player base to enjoy, it doesn't translate in the casual player enjoying the endgame dungeons. We love a challenge, we love to figure out stuff and acquire more skill as gamers, but still believe that is not what the core of WoW is, and definitely not what made WoW into the biggest MMO on the market. WoW's popularity that saw its peak back in Wrath of the Lich King was made possible because of the casual player base. Anyone that has done a difficult raid in modern WoW and then hopped into a classic raid has figured out already that all raids are basically a snooze fest. The difficulty back then was organizing 40 people, all the way to 25, to do the same thing, which is still a difficult we have today, albeit with better tools on our hand. Ever since then, the
Sure.
game has become steadily more and more complex. In a way, it has to be like this since gamers are getting better each year, and if it's a snore fest, it would lose to other MMOs. But the solution is definitely not the current version. And
Yeah, I agree. It's not the current version, but you can't go back to what you had in Classic, because we saw, Classic came back and people were killing bosses the day that the raid opened, all the way through. So you can't have that. But The amount of difficulty right now, it just seems like it's too high. Do I think they'll ever listen to the player base and revert the tank changes? Eventually. Yeah, eventually. I don't know why they did it in the first place. Like, I would have a better answer for that if I understood why they did it in the first place. I don't think tanking was broken to begin with. So why did it need to be fixed? I have no idea. So whatever, it depends on whatever their reasoning was. If they feel like they've achieved that, that's going to take way longer for them to agree to change it. But if the reason wasn't that based, then they'll change it sooner, hopefully. Tanks being less survivable is a great thing. We are sick of dumbass tanks who think they are good and pull stupid packs and out heal any damage they get. Well, I mean, if that's like a 1% in the other direction. Like you're gonna cater to the 1% idiots in the game who are just doing stupid shit, and you gotta change tanking for everybody across the board because of that. But I mean, I know that shit happened, but still, geez. I understand they didn't intend for tanks to be as strong as they were, but they basically struck gold and decided to blow the mine shaft up. Yeah, basically. That makes sense. Yeah, the changes just went too far. They wanted to make tanks more squishy, that's fine, but they went way too far with it.
Maybe the best example is Dragonflight Season 3, likely the most played and
Didn't you solo Delo and Dodie twice? Yeah, but I'm elite, Artemis. I'm elite, so there's that.
popular season in modern WoW. What was so special about it though? We can talk at length about the Amir Drisil raid, the dungeon pool, and the class balance, which I believe are all irrelevant. Amir Drisil was an okay raid, had some dope fights and was a fresh change of pace from Avarice, but didn't blow people's minds like Ulduar used to back in the day. The dungeon pool was also questionable, with dungeons like Everbloom and Throne of the Tides having very mixed receptions. So what was it in the end? For us, it is clear. Overall, the raid, heroic and lower, was tuned way easier than before. We had multiple skips and graveyards throughout the raid. We had repair and upgrade NPCs that saved time and friction. We had skips and paths to take to different bosses. Not something unique to Amir Drisil, but definitely something players appreciated. As for the Mythic Plus season, it was likely the easiest season to ever push keys in. I personally got my first 3k ever and did my first plus 24 key. On top of it, the
plus 25 is what you want. I miss it, man. I miss Dragonflight for that reason only. A Mythic Plus was so much more fun in Dragonflight. I actually enjoyed it. It was a good thing to do. I didn't feel like I needed an encyclopedia of knowledge to understand how the mechanics were going to work and everything. Now it's just way too complicated. It really is. You guys are telling me it's not complicated sometimes, but at the same time, you're sending me 17 links in chat for different add-ons to download because you think I need those add-ons to be able to competently tank a Mythic Plus. That's ridiculous. If I need to go to outside sources to be able to be competent enough to tank a Mythic Plus dungeon, then clearly the issue is the Mythic Plus dungeon and not the fact that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
gear was abundant, making every run way more rewarding than what we have today. Since the penalties were lower, the incentive to leave a dungeon was lower, the incentive to be an elitist prick was lower, and I am guilty of that, by the way. You might not know, but I can be an ass to people as well. Similar things happened twice before, once in Shadowlands, Season 4, and BFA in its final season as well. Both times the devs removed restrictions, removed frictions, whether it was corruptions on vendors or covenants being interchangeable at no cost. Whatever the case, that pushed players to play more and enjoy the game more. Same thing likely with Legion in 7.3.5 when the Mage Tower was made permanently available. Every time the barriers of entry for the game were lowered, aka responsibility raised, aka accessibility raised, aka the game made more casual, the player base responded. We had more players in
positive responses.
People actually had stuff to do that wasn't just world quests and delves, while the high-end players weren't as toxic, discriminatory, or impatient towards mistakes from other players, since the stakes of pushing content weren't as high. High-end elitist players like it when the game is made more challenging. Casual players like it when they can access everything without 15 weak RS, 2 class guides, 3 boss guides, and the reflexes of a world champion ping pong player.
By the way, when you make the game you make the game easier, do you know what happens? You get more intermingling between the elitists and the casuals. That's what ends up happening. Because, you know, when it's really hard, when it's really difficult, you know what ends up happening? The elite groups that are forming, guess what they're going to do? They're not going to invite a casual. They're not going to invite somebody with a slightly lower IO. They're not going to invite somebody with a, you know, slightly lower item level. These things are not, because they don't want to break the key. Who the fuck wants to break the key? So they're, or lose in the raid. So they're just going to invite the elite of the elite. And I'm not even talking about just a casual. They're not even going to invite somebody who plays the game a decent amount of time. Because even that person with the good IO and the good gear is going to be outmatched by somebody with the extremely high eye level and IO. And that's who they're going to look for. And that's the only people they're going to take. Otherwise, they won't even run it because they don't want to break shit. Whereas if it's easy, you're going to get invites all the time. People, they're just going to be like, yeah, we just need somebody to backfill this group. Doesn't matter. We know we're going to get this shit done. So we'll invite the lower level guy. And then guess what? The lower level guy, when he comes in, maybe he learns a thing or two. He gets to interact with some elitist players. Maybe he gets to learn a little bit about how to become elite. You get more, you know, like I said, more mixture between the player base.
Everyone wants their own version
It's good
of
all
the
the way
game
around.
that they consider is fun. The difference is that the bias has skewed heavily in favor of the elitist, who just so happens to be more vocal, watches more content, and makes more content online. But the life of the game has been hanging by a thread. There is a meter we could look at, and the marker would be around here at the moment. Obviously, it shouldn't be at either extreme, but if we pretend we ideally want it in the middle, it sure as hell doesn't feel like it, and it's likely right now what is killing the game, despite the War Within being one of the best expansions we have received in years.
It is a good
Worrying
expansion.
about the state of the game design can get exhausting at times, so we made a stupid video. A stupid tier list about everything. It is the ultimate tier list right here.
There it is. Yeah, it's a good video. It's a good video, and it is a challenge. It's a challenge for the devs that I said earlier I empathize with, because it's not easy to build a game when you're probably hearing from the elites more than anything. But if in a perfect world, I do think they should lean more to the casual side. You want to be in the middle, of course, but if you had to lean either way, I think you should lean a bit more to the casual side, because at the end of the day, that is the majority of the player base, and I just think it creates a healthier and more accessible game for everybody.